This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I hope you all had a happy holiday. I hope you all had a good, New Year's, everything like that. We got a lot to talk about in today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You can do it really easily, really quickly. Just go to the main page of our show, the GSMC Sports Podcast, and whatever you're listening to this on, Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll see probably in the top right-hand corner-ish, or maybe even dead center, a little button that just has a plus sign next to it and also says subscribe. If you could hit that button for us, that would mean the absolute world to us. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you want to get those alerts and those notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever device you might be listening to this on. And again, you'll get those alerts and notifications, and you'll know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. When we release it, you won't have to go look at Twitter or just go, check casually. You'll get those alerts whenever they are released, and then you can, be one of the first people to listen to a new episode again when we release it. So please, if you could subscribe to the podcast on our main page, whatever application or even website you're listening to this on, Spotify, Apple Music, Podbean, please subscribe to us on all those great platforms. We would really appreciate it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general if you are enjoying the content and discussion points of the show, the production, everything that goes on behind the scenes with our great team as well. So if you're just enjoying the show overall, we'd love it if you leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same main page, on that same website or application. Again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Podbean. You can leave us a review. If you want to write something, you can do that as well, but as long as you just leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, we would really appreciate that if you are enjoying the content of this show just in general. So again, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, in general, anything like that. And also, if you could give us a follow on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. Just overall, we would love to interact with you guys more on there. So if you follow us on all of those great social media platforms, again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Over on social media, we can talk about sports. We can talk about, maybe some NFL playoff games, maybe whatever the main NBA game is on that night on TNT or ESPN. But just overall on social media, we can talk to you guys, again, about sports breaking news, about anything sports related that you guys want to talk about. Social media is the place to do that, especially in real time. Again, with the, landscape of the NFL and NBA always changing, player movement, games happening, trades, injuries, whatever it may be. Social media is the best way to find our immediate reaction, maybe, or something like that. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would absolutely love it. In addition to subscribing to the podcast and leaving us that review, if you could follow us on all those great social media platforms. One more time, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy, healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. We have a fantastic show for you all today. Coming up later on in the show, I want to talk about some Deshaun Watson to the Carolina Panthers. Rumors, would they be willing to throw in a guy like Christian McCaffrey? It was sort of a prediction / report. There was some confusion about it on Twitter, but either way, in my last episode, I predicted that I thought Deshaun Watson would go to Carolina. I'll expand more on why I think that works for both sides. I'll also get into the J.J. Watt sweepstakes. He has been released by the Houston Texans. He is a free agent. There's been a bunch of teams interested. He's one of the hottest free agents on the market right now. Wouldn't surprise me if he signs sooner rather than later either. So I want to give you a list of teams that I think J.J. Watt should consider and ultimately give you a couple of teams that I think he will potentially go to. I'll give you maybe an official prediction. I really have two teams that I think it's a 50-50 split where I think he will go, so I'll give you that later on in the show as well. And stick around for the end of the show where I do want to break down some stuff. LeBron James, Anthony Davis is obviously out for about the next month. And why this next month could solidify LeBron James to win another MVP. He hasn't won one, I believe, between 6 and 8 years. I don't think he's won one. It's been a long time. He deserves one, obviously. He's the best player in the league right now. Why I think this could be his MVP. That's coming up at the very end of the show. But of course, this show is going to be dominated by everything Carson Wentz trade. If you haven't seen the news, when you're listening to this, Carson Wentz has been officially traded from the Philadelphia Eagles to the Indianapolis Colts. It came down to a 2-team race between the Colts and the Bears at the end of it, but of course, the Colts remained victorious, and they acquire Carson Wentz for a 3rd-round pick this year and a conditional 2nd-round pick in 2022. Now, there's obviously so many different angles to attack this trade from. We obviously have the Colts' point of view, which I will get to in a second. Also, in this segment, I want to touch on the Eagles' point of view. Where do they go from here in the quarterback room? Do they stick with Jalen Hurts like I predicted? Will they draft a guy? Will they look for free agency? We'll get into that as well. And of course, the Bears. They were the team that lost out the most on this trade. They didn't get the guy they were looking for, potentially in Carson Wentz. Where do they go from here? I'll tell you who I believe they should go after. It's the same name I predicted. If you listened to the last episode, I'll tell you why he makes sense a lot there as well. But let's start with the Colts here, because I think they're obviously the biggest, title grabber in this entire trade. They're the ones who acquire the star or former star quarterback, Carson Wentz, however you want to call him. And let's call it like it is. This is a risky move for the Colts, but it also has the potential to be a Super Bowl level reward. So how worthy is the risk of the reward? Now, of course, the Eagles had come out and said pretty much earlier that they were not going to trade Carson Wentz, that potentially Nick Sirianni was being brought in to quote-unquote fix Carson Wentz. And while everyone, including myself, had pegged the Colts as a potential destination for Carson when he had said privately that he wanted out of Philadelphia after everything with Jalen Hurts, after being benched and everything like that, the Colts were obvious. Frank Wright was the offensive coordinator in 2017 when Carson Wentz had an MVP-level season, in my opinion, would have won it if he hadn't gotten hurt that year. Of course, Philadelphia went on to win the Super Bowl, and Frank Wright gets the Indianapolis Colts job after Josh McDaniels steps down, and Carson Wentz was good in 2018 and pretty decent in 2019, but of course last year, 2020, just completely fell apart. So now you're looking to rebuild, you're looking for a change of scenery, you're hoping that what happened to Ryan Tannehill happens to Carson Wentz, and this is a new trend in the NFL. We're seeing it specifically this offseason. It was a little bit last offseason, of course Tannehill was the year before that, but coaches are confident in their ability, and almost instead of going for the draft, they'll look at a talented guy who maybe got screwed over by a situation that has a lot of talented physical tools, but played for a terrible organization with bad coaching, bad offensive line, never got a true shot. So a lot of these teams that already have a lot of contending pieces around them, but maybe don't have a high-level draft pick, instead of maybe waiting it out and tanking for a year or hanging on to that aging quarterback, teams are looking to revamp, and potentially instead of being, another year of Marcus Mariota, you bring in Ryan Tannehill like Tennessee did, and they're moving off of quarterbacks and they're giving guys second chances. Carson Wentz is one of the quarterbacks that is benefiting from that trend. Instead of him being out of the league or potentially becoming a backup going forward for Philly or another team, he's getting another starting opportunity somewhere. It doesn't happen to many quarterbacks. It's happening more and more now. We're obviously going to see a ton of it this offseason with guys like Sam Darnold, Marcus Mariota getting opportunities elsewhere. Carson Wentz now, Matthew Stafford earlier, of course, with the LA Rams. And it's a low-risk, high-reward move for the Colts, but this is a trend. The Colts felt that, at least Frank Wright did, in my opinion, this move screams similarly to how the Rams, the Rams trading for Matt Stafford, in my opinion, was a reflection of Sean McVay. That Les Snead and the organization of the Los Angeles Rams trust Sean McVay so much that they're willing to give up so many draft picks constantly to get these high-end level players, and to give up 2 first-round picks and Jared Goff, who was formerly Sean McVay's guy, obviously, all for Matthew Stafford. They're making that trade because they're so confident that Sean McVay can get them to a Super Bowl level with a quarterback like Matt Stafford. Now, obviously, the return that Philadelphia is getting and what the Colts had to give up is nowhere near the level of the Stafford trade, but still, the Colts believe that Carson Wentz is a better and a more ideal matchup and fit for Frank Reich than any other quarterback on the market right now, and there's plenty of them. Only one quarterback that has been rumored to be on the market has been taken, and really only two have officially found their home. We know Matt Stafford was going to be a Los Angeles Ram. He was traded from the Rams, so he was off the market, and we knew Trevor Lawrence was going to be a Jacksonville Jaguar. Besides those two things, every single quarterback that had rumored to be available, including the likes of Derek Carr, Sam Darnold, even trading up in the draft for a guy like Zach Wilson, who I'll talk about later on the show, all were options for the Colts. But they wanted to get this done sooner rather than later, way before free agency and way before the draft. They go all in on Carson Wentz, which means that they trust and they do believe in Carson Wentz, and the organization of the Colts, Jim Irsay, the great general manager Chris Ballard, believe in Frank Reich to that same level that the LA Rams believe in Sean McVay. They believe Frank Reich is a Super Bowl caliber head coach that with the right quarterback, with the right roster, can win you a Super Bowl. And they believe that they have that roster right now. They certainly have the defense. They certainly have the offensive line as long as they figure out left tackle. If they want to move Quentin Nelson to left tackle potentially, but it looks like he's going to stay at guard. Wouldn't surprise me if they were the number one offensive line free agent destination, though, so keep an eye on that. If they can get a left tackle and they can get a stud wide receiver. They have a couple nice wide receivers. I really like Pascal when he stays healthy. I'm a huge fan of Michael Pittman, but I don't know if he's ever going to develop into a true number one. I've always viewed him as sort of a Juju Smith-Schuster type guy, half one, but really, really good two, if you could do that. He's also big and long as well. T.Y. Hilton is a free agent. It's unclear if he's going to be coming back. So if they can get a true number one wide receiver, which, by the way, they can because they have plenty of cap space. I believe they are top 3 in the league when it comes to that. They might have taken down a little bit because of the Carson Wentz acquisition, but I don't think, at least for the Colts, he's that big of a cap hit for them this year. So entering in before the trade, the Colts had $69 million in cap space, which is second in the NFL. I don't think Carson Wentz takes up a huge chunk of that this year, meaning I believe they still have upwards of $50 million this year to spend. Go after a guy like Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, Curtis Samuel, Corey Davis. The list goes on and on of wide receivers that are available free agency this year. Also, we've heard names like Odell Beckham and Julio Jones become potentially available via trade. And, of course, this draft class is obviously loaded with talent going all the way to the second round, where you could potentially add a guy who could be an impact full starter day one. And on top of all that, the Colts didn't even have to give up their 2021 first-round pick, so they could be in played for a guy like Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota, who I love, or somebody of that caliber. This move for the Colts screams win now. They are not here for the future anymore, and the Colts haven't been really since Frank Reich came into the forefront of the Indianapolis, right? They had Andrew Luck when he initially took that job, win now mode. Yes, they had that Brissett floater year, kind of caught in no man's land, but they were never tanking. They never wanted a high draft pick. Didn't draft a quarterback, went Phillip Rivers, which screams win now mode because of his age. Carson Wentz is a win now move. He's already paid. You already want to have seen him at his best. This isn't a developmental thing for Carson Wentz. This is a fixing thing. They want Carson Wentz to return to the player that he was in 2017. Will he do that? I'm not sure, but there is no development of Carson Wentz. It's just rehoning and resharpening the skills and talent that we all know he has and that he displayed in 2017. And even so, 2018 and 2019 were both plus years for Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz did not play bad in 2018 or 2019. In fact, I would argue that he played good and was probably one of Philadelphia's better offensive players, if not the best offensive player that Philadelphia had at that time for those 2 years. And one of them obviously led to a playoff appearance before he got that concussion. But last year was just a complete and utter disaster. His footwork looked off. His headspace looked off. He didn't look like he was in the right mind to be the Philadelphia quarterback anymore, and clearly couldn't handle the pressure of having a guy as a backup who eventually could take his job one day. There's been rumors that he does not respond well to hard coaching, but we know he responds well to Frank Reich's coaching. He obviously had the MVP year. And again, this is a win-now move. The only holes that this roster has is the left tackle and a number one receiver position. And despite those two things, and with Phillip Rivers as a quarterback, they gave the Buffalo Bills a real hard time in the first round, and if they had a better quarterback that wouldn't maybe leave 10 points on the board like Phillip Rivers did, they could have bounced the Bills in the first round. This Colts team is really, really good. Their division is only getting worse. Deshaun Watson is obviously leaving it. The Titans, while are very good, Derrick Henry's only a year older, and we know what happens to running backs when they age, and Ryan Tannehill's beyond 30 now. I think he'll be turning 33 coming up this season, so he's aging as well. So you know that their win-now window is closing. They were better 2 years ago than they were last year, and the Titans seem to be on the decline. Not necessarily to the decline level of missing the playoffs or going, 4-12 or something like that, but maybe they aren't as good as they were when they displayed 2 years ago by beating New England and Foxborough and Baltimore in Baltimore. They might not be that exact replica team. So this division is obviously theirs for the taking, and Carson Wentz offers them an opportunity. Now, if Carson Wentz can return to the 2017 form that he was under Frank Reich and be that MVP level quarterback that made those incredible throws with different arm angles off different platforms and was really Patrick Mahomes before Patrick Mahomes. The 2017 season for Carson Wentz showed an incredible display of physical, gifted talent all put together. It was like watching Josh Allen this year, but even better. And it was Mahomes-like, obviously before Mahomes blew up, it was Carson Wentz who was really the athletic specimen of the league that everybody loved, him and Andrew Luck. And it was a lot of fun to see him play that season, and of course I think he would have won MVP if he didn't get hurt. I don't know if Frank Reich can return him to that form. His confidence is clearly shot ever since the Nick Foles situation, and it only got worse when they drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round. I'm not going to sit here and predict that the Indianapolis Colts will get 2017 Carson Wentz. It's unclear if that player is ever still going to come back. We said similar things to Cam Newton about, his 2015 or 2016 run. Would the Patriots get that level of Cam Newton? They obviously didn't. So I don't want to say that Carson Wentz is going to go out there and look like the MVP level player that he was in 2017. But I do think at minimum we're going to get 2018, 2019 Carson Wentz. And in fact, I think we'll get better. I think we're going to get a Carson Wentz that looks more refined, that looks back to the fundamentals, that has improved his footwork, that has improved his ability to read defenses, and he's going to flash that superstar MVP level ability with his arms, with his arm throws, with his big time plays down the field, and that vertical style offense that the Indianapolis Colts were really missing last year because of the lack of arm strength that Phillip Rivers had at the end of his career. So I'm expecting a big year for Carson Wentz. I think this is a win-win on both sides at this point. I understand that the Eagles wanted to get rid of Carson Wentz. They didn't want to pay that contract, and at this point, they're going through a full rebuild, and Wentz didn't really fit their timeline going forward anyway. By the time Philadelphia is really going to get good again, it's going to be at least a 2 to 4 year rebuild. When you're looking at it, you look at teams like the Miami Dolphins who are doing everything right in their rebuild. They haven't made the playoffs in the first 2 years, so we can at least expect that, meaning Wentz would be closer to 30 by the time Philadelphia, if they did everything right, would be back into the fold as a premier roster. So it didn't make sense for either of these teams. I was surprised that Wentz was even going to recuperate a second-round pick, and I'll talk about the condition in a second here because I think it's the most interesting part of the trade. I thought that you would have had to maybe attach an asset to get rid of the contract, but clearly teams still believed in Carson Wentz's clear physical talent. He's a lot similar to a guy like Justin Herbert. That's the level. That's how good he looked. He used to be like that. If you watched any remnants of the 2017 NFL season, you know how good Carson Wentz was. Again, I don't think he'll be that, but I do think he'll be a better, more efficient version of 2018, 2019 Carson Wentz with flashes of 2017 Carson Wentz. We'll see a bunch of big-time throws in tight windows, those wow plays, those crazy arm angles. Carson Wentz will show you flashes of that this year in the Frank Reich system, and I think it was an incredible move for the Colts going forward. Now, the return that Philadelphia got is obviously fascinating. They got a second-round pick and a third-round pick, but with that condition of the second-round pick, I want to tell you why Philadelphia might not have given up on Carson Wentz in its entirety. Either that and also where do the Chicago Bears go from here in their quarterback situation, all coming up next right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my initial thoughts on the Carson Wentz to Indianapolis Colts trade, and that was sort of the Colts side of things. I want to continue this discussion going into this segment because it's obviously dominating NFL headlines, and I want to address a couple of other things as well. I do want to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles side here in a second, including the compensation, and the Bears side of it, where they go from here as well. And at the end, hopefully, of this segment, if I have time, I want to tell you if I think the Colts are a Super Bowl contender, like some people have said, and why I think they might be. But starting off with the Eagles, I explained to you why it's a low risk, high reward for the Colts. They give up a second and a third round pick. Obviously, the second can turn into a first, which I'll talk about in a second. They have a stacked roster. Frank Reich and Carson Wentz know each other. It was an easy move for them to make, and it was logical, right? So let's talk about the return here. Where does Philadelphia go from here? We obviously knew that Wentz was going to be traded eventually. Indianapolis made the most sense. We knew the return wasn't going to be Stafford like they wanted. But there is an interesting condition here. And it's that this second-round pick in 2022 can turn into a first-round pick in 2022 if Carson Wentz either plays 75% of snaps for the Indianapolis Colts this season or plays 70% of snaps and the Indianapolis Colts go to the playoffs. So as long as Carson Wentz plays above, or at least plays 75% of snaps or 70% of snaps and the Colts go to the playoffs, that pick becomes a first-round pick. Obviously, the argument is that, well, if the incentives do hit and that becomes a first-round pick for Philadelphia, then the Colts trade was even more validated because that means Carson Wentz played well, your team made the playoffs, yada, yada, this, and I agree with you. That means the trade is worth it. I think no matter what happens with the second-round pick, the trade immediately becomes worth it with the Indianapolis Colts. I think they'll win a bunch of games. I think Carson Wentz will look good. And I think eventually this second-round pick will turn into a first-round pick. I do believe it's going to end up being a 2022 first-round pick after Carson Wentz leads the Colts to the playoffs this year. I really do believe that. So let's talk about Philadelphia. Which this is what makes the situation so ironic with this specific trade and why Philadelphia is a complete dumpster fire, in my opinion, just right now. I'm not saying they were in such a good position at the end of 2017. They had won a Super Bowl with two different quarterbacks. Doug Peterson looked like a superstar head coach. Their general manager, Howie Roseman, was incredible, making moves, adding veterans around Carson Wentz. The team looked great, and at the end of the 2017 championship with the Philadelphia Eagles, we thought that this team would be back there next year, that this was going to be a good team for a while. People were locked up, they were drafting well at the time, and everything has just really, hit the fan since then. It's been the complete opposite. They're losing guys are aging poorly, they're not hitting on any of their draft picks, they can't get a freaking receiver to save their life, they're not making any trades benefiting the team, all of this. So now they're entering a full-fledged rebuild. But the irony of all this is, while they traded Carson Wentz, they don't think Carson Wentz is bad. They don't think he's garbage. They don't think he's trash. Because if the Philadelphia Eagles thought that Carson Wentz was a terrible quarterback in this league and was unfixable, that there was no chance that Carson Wentz would ever be a good quarterback in this league again, that he would be Brock Osweiler or Mark Sanchez at the end of his career, just terrible, turnover-prone, awful quarterback, they wouldn't have accepted this trade with a condition on the second-round pick. Because in order for this to become a first-round pick for Philadelphia in 2022, Carson Wentz has to play well. He has to be healthy. He has to lead them to the playoffs. So Philadelphia believes in Carson Wentz so much that he's going to succeed in another team in Indianapolis, that he will do well with the former employer Frank Reich, and that they believe in their former employee Frank Reich so much and their former quarterback Carson Wentz, who they just bash in the media all the time. All the hate Carson Wentz gets, Philadelphia still believes in him so much that they're willing to accept a second-round pick with a condition because they're confident it will become a first-round pick going forward. Philadelphia traded Carson Wentz away knowing he's going to be successful because at the end of the day, Philadelphia knows Carson Wentz isn't that bad. We are. Philadelphia, the Eagles, the organization is the problem, not Carson Wentz. They let him down. They never showed full trust in him by drafting Jalen Hurts in the second round and making him his backup, somebody always looking over him, by always constantly buying into the narrative that he's injured every time and things like that, by never getting him a true number one dominant wide receiver on the edge, by never getting him an incredible run game either for any of his tenure in Philadelphia, and by letting the offensive line really age and dissolve to a point that it would, force Carson Wentz to make some big-time plays and he would get himself hurt doing that. So the Eagles organization, in my opinion, let Carson Wentz down. And they know that they did that because they accepted a condition on the second-round pick. If they thought Carson Wentz was bad, they would have wanted a first-round pick with no conditions. They don't even want to take the risk that Carson might be bad at Indianapolis or something like that. They're so confident that Carson Wentz will succeed in Indianapolis and lead that team to the playoffs and have a fantastic second part of his career in Indy that they were willing to accept the condition on a second-round pick because they know in their heart of hearts that they were the issue, not Carson Wentz. And they will be getting a first-round pick in 2022 because he'll look pretty damn good for the Colts going forward. Now, the other aspect of the Eagles now is what do they do with the quarterback situation? They're a full-fledged rebuild. This roster right now is bad. Nick Sirianni's a first-time coach coming in. He wasn't there when they drafted Jalen Hurts. Obviously, the GM still was, which is why it leads me to believe that I think Jalen Hurts will be the quarterback for Philly going forward. Now, there's been some rumors that they're going to draft the guy, potentially Zach Wilson. I think Zach Wilson's going number 2 overall in this draft to the New York Jets. I'm very high on him. Not as high as I am on Trevor Lawrence, but that's a debate for another day. I think he's going top 2. So if a team like they want to go up and trade for a guy like Zach Wilson, it's going to have to take a lot for them to move up there. I don't think they're going to be able to. I understand it's only 5 picks for Philly to go from 6 to maybe 2 or 4 picks. But again, I just think the Jets are going to be locked into a guy like Zach Wilson after they move off of Sam Darnold. So then you're looking at Trey Lance or Mac Jones, maybe even Justin Fields. I'm not sure. Then you get into some repetitive things with mobility and things like that. I think Justin Fields is better than Jalen Hurts, but the general manager and the current GM of Philly did draft Jalen Hurts with the intention of probably playing him at some point. You don't take a quarterback in the second round if you don't think eventually he's going to play for you potentially, or he's going to play significant minutes and significant snaps. I think they let Jalen Hurts ride it out this 1 year. Wouldn't surprise me if they went after a guy like Nick Foles from the Chicago Bears in the trade market. Maybe they can work something out. Bring in some veteran competition for Jalen, bring in a mentor, and have him take the reins for a year. Again, Jalen Hurts went 1-3 as a starter at the end of last year, had the worst completion percentage in the NFL, so there's some things that you shouldn't like, but again, he had that signature win over the Saints, could have had another signature win over Washington if he wasn't obviously pulled from the game for tanking reasons or whatever you want to call it. So I think Philadelphia going forward will give Jalen Hurts this 1 year with some veteran competition. I think they take a receiver 6th overall still. But man, for the Colts, this Carson Wentz trade is legit, man. And I want to answer this. I want to circle back to the Colts in a second here. I want to talk about Chicago first. And then I'll end with the Colts and why I think they're a Super Bowl contender. So that was Philly's side, right? It was a terrible situation. They had to move off the quarterback. They recruit some value, but it's just funny, in my opinion, for them to accept the condition on the second-round pick. They know he's going to be good. They know what other people... If you're not believing in Carson Wentz right now, you should, because the team that just traded him still believes in him if they're willing to accept the condition on the second-round pick. Moving on to Chicago. So it came down to 2 teams, Colts and the Bears, for who was going to get Carson Wentz. Now, obviously the Colts are in a completely different situation than the Bears are. The Bears coach and GM, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, are both on the hot seat and could both potentially lose their jobs at the end of this season. Mitch Trubisky has clearly hit a ceiling with them. They have a great defense. I think they have a really good offensive and creative offensive system. I'm very high on Matt Nagy. I'm not so high on Ryan Pace. I don't think he's a great GM. But I think Matt Nagy is a good coach. And I think he was on the short list of people that had the potential to fix Carson Wentz. I wouldn't trust him as much as I would trust Frank Wright. But I did think that if Wentz was traded to Chicago, there was a chance that things would work out. I wouldn't say it's a guarantee, but now I think, I know the Colts are going to be good next year. I wouldn't have known for a fact if the Bears were going to be good with Carson Wentz next year or something like that. But the Bears now also need a quarterback, and they don't have a high enough pick to get one of the top guys. Philadelphia at least is the 6th overall pick. They could get Justin Fields if Wilson and Lawrence go, 1 or 2-1 or 1-2 or whatever you want to call it. They could get a guy like Justin Fields. The Bears are not going to get that. They have the lower end of the first round. They obviously have made the playoffs. Matt Nagy, again, I am high on him. I think he is a really good NFL coach. I think his offensive system is fantastic. His Mitch Trubisky, he makes Mitch Trubisky's numbers look a lot like Jared Goff's, and I've ranted and raved on how I think Jared Goff is an efficient quarterback in this league. If you gave him a more talented quarterback that could operate in that creative system, I think it would benefit him going forward. Again, I don't know the capability of Ryan Pace as a GM. He hasn't done well drafting that much. I don't know what he's done in free agency all that well. He signed Robert Quinn to that huge deal. How far did that get him? Things like that. He's really hung up on Trubisky. So what I think the Bears will do going forward, and what they should do, is what I predicted in my last episode. They should re-sign Mitch Trubisky on the cheap as a backup/competition level guy. He is an athlete. He knows the system. If there was ever an injury to your future quarterback or something like that, Trubisky knows the system, can come in right away and, sort of evaluate it from a whole and still keep it going and keep it afloat and maybe win you a couple games. And as a matter of fact, they've made the playoffs twice with him, including last year. The Bears did make the playoffs last year. I know that it wasn't with a great record or anything like that, but they made the playoffs and Arizona didn't with Mitch Trubisky. So if Matt Nagy can just get a capable, more talented quarterback with his arm, I think some big things could happen in Chicago. They could be a sleeping giant. That guy is Sam Darnold. That's who I predicted goes after, the Chicago Bears go after. He's only 23 years old. In my opinion, just like Carson Wentz, Sam Darnold is a really gifted passer of the football, playmaking type quarterback that can move with his legs and also throw from crazy arm angles and things like that. I think his numbers and his tape looks bad because of the situation around him. I think Adam Gase is maybe the worst head coach in NFL history. We know the Jets have been a dumpster fire for the better part of the last decade. So I think he deserves a second chance as well. And again, just 23 years old and still has a lot of good things on tape. When you watch Sam Darnold tape, you see a lot of stupid interceptions. A lot of quarterbacks go through that. Brett Favre threw so many picks. But then you see a lot of things of him, a lot of plays of him just making magic happen with his legs outside of the pocket and having some incredible throws on the run from crazy arm angles. I think Matt Nagy and Sam Darnold could be a really good partnership together. Can the GM Ryan Pace get it done? That's another question. But if Matt Nagy and Sam Darnold do link up, I do think Chicago would be a way better team next year than they would be last year. And I think Sam Darnold would have a real shot at reviving his career in Chicago. And I wouldn't throw it, I wouldn't end the possibility that Sam Darnold could be the franchise quarterback in Chicago. If I was a Bears fan, I would really, really want Sam Darnold. I think he's really talented. He's a playmaker. He's got a big enough arm to throw in that cold weather. And he's going to be hungry looking for a chance to really save his NFL career at just 23 years old. And I think the Chicago Bears creative offense would be perfect for that. Finally, for this segment, and finally overall in the Carson Wentz trade, this will be the last part I talk about it for at least a little bit. I've told you all three sides now. I told you what I thought about the Colts initially, the Bears, and the Eagles side. The final thing I want to talk about is circling back to Indianapolis. Can they win a Super Bowl? And I was thinking about this a little bit. Why not? We saw that aggressive teams that go after their quarterback, potentially not via the draft or via not a young quarterback via the draft or something like that, they win Super Bowls. Tampa Bay was the most aggressive team in the league last year. They got Tom Brady in free agency. They added Rob Gronkowski's rights via trade. They signed Antonio Brown. They signed Leonard Fournette. They were always constantly looking to improve their roster through veterans and things like that, and they were the aggressive team. This is an aggressive move by the Colts. They are being aggressive, taking a risk trying to fix Carson Wentz and return him to the player that he was hopefully in 2017. I think aggressiveness is rewarded in the NFL, and I think the Indianapolis Colts, in my opinion, are a potential Super Bowl team next year. Would they be my pick to win the Super Bowl or come out of the AFC? Nope, that would still belong to the Chiefs for sure. But they come in my opinion, now as probably a top 4 team in the AFC for sure. I think they will win that division. They have the ceiling to be the second best team in the AFC if Carson Wentz returns to that 2017 form. I anticipate that he'll probably return to like a little bit better of a 2019, 2018 Carson Wentz, but not quite 2017 form. So I think they'll still be below the Chiefs and maybe even the Bills. But the Colts are right up there, man. And when you look at this roster compared to the 2017 Philadelphia Eagles, you see a lot of similarities. A stacked offensive line, assuming the Colts get a better left tackle, and a really good defense, and of course a creative Frank Wright offensive system. You put those three things together with a lot of nice offensive pieces, a decent run game with Jonathan Taylor, a couple of decent wide receivers, Michael Pittman, maybe T.Y. Hilton comes back, and who knows, maybe Indianapolis drafts a guy in the first round or signs a guy like Chris Godwin or something like that. And then the Colts look a lot like that 2017 Philadelphia Eagle team, which obviously won a Super Bowl. So I think the Colts are legit. I think Carson Wentz will have a big bounce-back season next year. And don't be surprised if you hear his name in the Comeback Player of the Year conversation. I think it could be a real possibility going forward for Carson Wentz and the Indianapolis Colts. I cannot wait to watch it going forward. That's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break, I will be getting into some of the other major NFL news storylines going on right now. J.J. Watt, free agency sweepstakes, a couple of teams I think he could potentially go to, and what team do I think he inevitably ends up signing with. And also, there's a big rumor going around right now that the Panthers are going to be ultra aggressive, maybe the most aggressive team when going after Deshaun Watson when he is made available. Of course, in my last episode, I predicted Deshaun Watson would eventually become a Carolina Panther. That's the team I think he will go to, so we'll break that down as well, some of those reports / predictions. And of course, don't forget to stick around at the end of the episode. I'm going to explain to you why this might be
Check out the
LeBron
show
James
that's built on the
MVP here in
MMA,
just a few
from
minutes
UFC
at the
to
very
extreme
end of the
cage
episode. So we'll get
fighting.
into
They
all
got
that
the
great
fights
stuff
covered.
right after
Check out the
this short break.
GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. Again, if you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished attacking every angle of the Carson Wentz to Indianapolis Colts trade. Again, to recap, I really do believe the Colts take a step forward here. How big of a step forward, that's a little bit unclear. They could go all the way to Super Bowl contenders if Wentz returns to that 2017 form. But I think at minimum, Carson Wentz has a bounce-back year where he throws, I don't know, maybe 25 plus touchdowns, hopefully closer to 30. I'd love to see Carson Wentz throw over 30 touchdowns again. That would be the dream. I think he threw 43 in 2017. I'd love him to throw, anywhere between 27 and 33 this year. Keep the interceptions to under 12. And I think that'd be a good year for Carson Wentz. I'd really like to see a 33 12 touchdown interception season for him this year, and the Colts make a big leap forward. If he could somehow get to that level again of like 40 plus touchdowns a year, something like that, what he was doing in 2017, the Colts could be right up there with the Chiefs and Bills as contenders to come out of the AFC, in my opinion. They could be that good. That's how good their O-line is. That's how good their defense is, and I'm a huge believer in Frank Reich. Now, transitioning to some other NFL stories, I'm sure you've all heard the news. J.J. Watt was released by the Houston Texans per his request. He's a free agent now for the first time, and he's having a little bit of fun with it. A lot of guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith-Schuster have taken to social media to recruit him already. He's one of the hottest free agents on the market. And I think it's not just because of how good J.J. Watt has been. He obviously hasn't been the player that he was these most recent seasons, and he's had a lot of injuries. But J.J. Watt's also just a different type of leader and personality. He has a brand. He is one of the more iconic defensive players in the league, in a league that doesn't have many iconic defensive players, right? There's not a lot of defensive players in the NFL that are known for just beyond what they do on the field, for their personality, for things like that. J.J. Watt's one of those players. He's known for his leadership. He's known for his, just his whole entire mantra, the level how jacked he is. He's ripped, obviously. He's got the six-pack. He's got the brand, the workout brand, obviously, of course, as well, going forward. And there's a lot of teams that are going to be interested in him. I think there are two teams that J.J. Watt really wants to go to. I think that there's a bunch of teams J.J. Watt would love to play for. Bills and Cleveland included, who are reportedly the front runners right now, are both Buffalo and Cleveland. Both of those teams are contenders. Both of those teams have money to pay him. The two teams that I think J.J. Watt wants to go to, though, is I think he either wants to be a Green Bay Packer or a Pittsburgh Steeler. He obviously played in Wisconsin, was from Wisconsin, would probably like to be a Packer. They need him badly. It would be incredible to see him bolster up their run defense, maybe also play some situational pass rush. You put him with Kenny Clark on the defensive line, that looks legit for Green Bay. And, of course, going back home to Wisconsin would be great for J.J. as well. That's where I want to see J.J. Watt land. Personally, I would like to see him go to the Packers. I think they give him the best opportunity to win going forward. The only issue with Green Bay is their cap situation. Eventually, they're going to have to pay Aaron Jones potentially this offseason or let him walk. Aaron Rodgers might want to be re-upped on a new contract. Same with Devontae Adams, maybe also Alan Lazard, and some of other guys like Robert Tonyan as well. So they have a lot of guys they're going to have to pay. Jair Alexander eventually too. But if J.J. Watt would consider taking maybe a little bit less money and prioritize winning, which it's been rumored he may do, we don't really know J.J.'s plans at this point, Him on the Packers makes a lot of sense for both sides. They need a run stopper. They need a big presence on the defensive line. And also they just need to make a splashy, big name hire or draft pick. They haven't really done anything flashy in years. Both Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams weren't flashy draft picks. They just developed into the superstars that they are. J.J. Watt's been a superstar for a little bit now. He's an established player. He's a big name. Show Aaron Rodgers that you're going out there and you're looking to win now and always, not just preparing for the next disaster. That's what Green Bay seems to do. They always seem to prepare for the next problem or the next injury or the next setback or something like that. They're never living in the moment. They're never just like saying, screw it, let's win now. I need Green Bay to have the same mentality that Tampa Bay had with the aggressiveness, with the trades, with the draft picks, with the signings, all of that stuff. That's what Tampa Bay had. They were aggressive. They were assertive. It got them a Super Bowl. The Rams, they're being aggressive. They're being assertive. They're trying to get to the Super Bowl. The Colts right now are trading for Carson Wentz. That's being aggressive. I need the Packers to be aggressive. And if you have to overpay a little bit, overpay for J.J. Watt. Go into the luxury tax. Do whatever it takes to get a guy like J.J. Watt on your defense. I think it could be huge for Green Bay moving forward. Also, Pittsburgh is a name to keep an eye on because both of his brothers play there. They have a lot of free agents coming up. They're going to have to pay his brother, TJ, at some point. They're going to have to pay Mika Fitzpatrick at some point. Will they let Juju Smith-Schuster walk? Ben's, contract situation is obviously in shambles as well. Obviously, the quotes that came out today of Ben's, as of right now, Ben Roethlisberger is the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not a lot of, encouragement from Kevin Colbert. I don't know if the Steelers are going to be in a winning situation moving forward. With how good Baltimore is and how good Cleveland looks, and Cincinnati could be on the rise too. I don't know what Pittsburgh is going to be going forward as a solidified contender and winner. If the NFL was a 17-week schedule last year, I think Pittsburgh would have missed the playoffs. I think they would have lost out and honestly had not made it. They barely made the playoffs, obviously got blown out of the water by Cleveland. Sort of a changing of the guard in the AFC North, like I've said before on episodes before that I think that Pittsburgh's more on the decline while Pittsburgh's more going up. I understand that he might want to play with his brothers, though, so those are the two teams that I think he would want to go to. Now, could he still sign with Buffalo or Cleveland? 100%. I just don't know if those are his preferred destinations, but if Pittsburgh isn't going to win anything anytime soon and won't pay him, and Green Bay doesn't have the guts to pay him or maybe overpay some money as well, then that would eliminate some of his favorite options, and I could see Buffalo or Cleveland going after J.J. Watt. Buffalo would be huge. I think Buffalo needs him more than Cleveland does. Cleveland needs more secondary and back-end help. Buffalo could use more help on the defensive line, some pass rush and things like that. So J.J. Watt would make a ton of sense in Buffalo as well. Would he want to move to that market? Does he think that Buffalo could ever get above Kansas City, or maybe that the Colts are that good or something like that? That's the interesting part. Does he have a relationship with anybody there? Not necessarily. So I think the Packers and Steelers are the two teams that J.J. Watt would really, really like to go to, but they may not be the most realistic options due to some cap flexibility and things like that. Obviously, with the COVID year and everything like that, the salary cap has gone down to $175 million this year, so teams are already going to have to make some tough calls like Green Bay will have to make with Aaron Jones, and every team will have to make at least one tough call this year with a player they really like because of cap situations due to COVID and everything like that. Will J.J. Watt fit in with a team making a hard decision? Will a hard decision for a team like Green Bay be letting somebody else walk to make room for a guy like J.J. Watt on their defense? That's the tough calls that Green Bay's going to have to make going forward. But the J.J. Watt sweepstakes are going to be fun for sure to see. He wasn't the player that he once was, but his leadership and his personality puts butts in seats and sells jerseys, so that's appealing enough. And I still think he's a really productive player in this league. He's not maybe the super megastar that he was, but he's still a really productive player and a plus for your team. So when you incorporate that plus the jersey sales and what he does for your team and the leadership, then all of that makes the worth maybe the slightly higher price you're going to have to pay for him for a guy of his age or something like that. Transitioning quickly here to Deshaun Watson. There was a report/prediction that came out. People can't really seem to see what it was, if it was a prediction or report, but it's expected that the Panthers are going to be ultra aggressive when going after Deshaun Watson. It makes sense. He played college in that state/area, so he's known in the Carolinas. It'd be really huge if they could get a quarterback going forward. They have a really nice offensive cast with Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel potentially if he re-signs, but he also may walk. They have the 8th overall pick, and apparently they offered the 8th overall pick for Matthew Stafford in a trade, but Stafford didn't want to go play in Carolina, which is still in a rebuild right now. Matt Rule appears to want to win sooner rather than later, and also I am anticipating Joe Brady, who's the offensive coordinator of Carolina won't be the offensive coordinator there for many, many years. I think he'll eventually work his way up to a head coaching job. His work, what he did with Joe Burrow at LSU, and had a really nice offense last year in Carolina. They're just missing a quarterback. And Deshaun Watson would put that offense into top 5 in the league, in my opinion, with the combination of Matt Rule, Joe Brady, the playmaking style of Watson, the offensive weapons everywhere. It would be great. If any team's going to be ultra aggressive in selling the farm of draft picks, I think it would also be Carolina. They're not a major market. They're not going to be able to sign these guys like Tom Brady in free agency or something like that to go that way. They're also going to miss out on Zach Wilson and probably Trevor Lawrence as well. Both of those two guys will be gone by then. So then you're talking about Justin Fields or Trey Lance, which have some issues with reading defenses and things like that. And I think Deshaun Watson, I think the Carolina Panthers could just say, screw it. Here's 3 to 5 first-round picks, a couple of seconds, whatever it takes to get done. Some people have been speculating Christian McCaffrey, but I don't know if the Panthers are going to want to move him. I feel like the whole point would be want to combine the powers of Christian McCaffrey, maybe the best back in the NFL, and Deshaun Watson, the top 3 quarterback in the NFL. I feel like that's how they would want to do it. So I feel like they'd be more inclined to give up some draft capital in the future. So again, if any team's going to say screw it, give 4 to 5 first-round picks for him. I don't think it'll be the Jets. I don't think it'll be the Dolphins. I really do believe it's going to be the Carolina Panthers. I think they are the team to land Deshaun Watson. I think they're the ultra-aggressive team, and they're the ones who land him, and they're the ones who give the Godfather offer that the Texans at a certain point won't be able to refuse. Not to mention he's in the NFC. You never have to see him. You only play him once every 4 years, which is everything good for the Texans in this absolute disaster of, whatever's going on right now with Deshaun Watson and things like that. So I think the Carolina Panthers would be really, really awesome if they could land Deshaun Watson. And yeah, I think J.J. Watt wants to be a Packer or a Steeler, but will he get his wish? That's going to be interesting to see going forward. That's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this final short break, I want to tell you why this might be the year for LeBron James to win his MVP. We say it each and every year, but why I think this year he has a real opportunity to do so. All that good stuff right after this final short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. For the final segment of today's show, it'll be a quick one. I want to explain to you all, after quickly explaining in the last segment, I gave you some potential destinations for J.J. Watt. Again, I think after being released by the Texans, he's want to be probably a Packer or a Steeler and play with his brothers. Will he get that wish? Who knows? And again, I really do believe Carolina is the best overall destination for Deshaun Watson, besides a team like the Dolphins, who are a contender and things like that, but it looks like they're not interested. So I think Carolina would be the next best option for him if San Francisco and Miami are not options. Now, quickly switching to LeBron James, Anthony Davis is going to be out for the next month or so, and I think LeBron James, if he dominates over this next period, again, it's a shortened season, the trade deadline's about 5 weeks away. If he dominates these next 3 to 5 weeks, which would be a huge chunk of the NBA season, and still dominates at that level with the Lakers, showing that he's still the best player in the league, he could be the MVP this season. If you're looking at some other people who might win it, you look at guys like Donovan Mitchell, in my opinion, for Utah deserves it. They're number one in the West right now. Nikola Jokic for Denver deserves consideration. Damian Lillard deserves consideration. But if you look at some of these other teams, guys like Giannis, teams like the Celtics, Their teams are struggling. They're not doing so hot. So if LeBron can still dominate in this year without Anthony Davis and, over the next 3 to 5 weeks and over a course of a month or something like that, I think LeBron James could finally get the MVP that he deserves. Now, I'm going to say something that's been said by a lot of people, but I also just want to state that I agree with this. LeBron James is the most valuable player in the league. He's been the best player in the league every single year he's been healthy since probably 10 at the latest, you could say. But most likely probably closer to 2007, 2008, LeBron James was the best player on the planet, and it's been that way for a long time. The fact that he hasn't won more MVPs is criminal. I thought he should have won it last year over Giannis Antetokounmpo. I understand that Giannis had a great season. He deserves it this year. I know Kevin Durant's also having a great year. I've heard that name been thrown out there, but their team is also sort of struggling a little bit. I think they'll get it figured out eventually, though. Joel Embiid's another name that could obviously win MVP with how good Philadelphia is doing, but LeBron deserves it, man. He deserved it last year, and if he, again, dominates without Anthony Davis, who, again, has had some injury concerns in the past with New Orleans, didn't get hurt a lot last year, so that was a good sign. It's getting pretty banged up this year. Maybe it's the short off season, whatever it may be. Hopefully he's back and healthy, hopefully 100% for the playoffs. He'll be back way before then, but if there is another injury that comes up or something like that, I just want to see AD and LeBron completely healthy for the playoffs, because they're so much fun to watch together when completely healthy in the playoffs as well, against teams like Utah, who will be a lot of fun to watch going forward, and obviously the Clippers as well in the West. So if LeBron can dominate over these next 3 to 5 weeks, I think he has a real shot at MVP. And the other thing I want to talk about quickly in the NBA is, in fact, the Utah Jazz. It's going to be fascinating to see if they're legit or not. They're the most interesting team in the NBA right now that's caught my eye. The only other thing that's really been more interesting to me in the NBA is the downfall of a couple of teams. The Heat and Celtics, man, are not good. They met in the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Both teams are 500 or worse this year, and both teams need to make a move really, really badly. So I want to, again, that's another interesting thing to keep an eye on, is the Miami Heat and Boston Celtics, where they go to try to make some moves to upgrade the roster. Danny Ainge recently said publicly that he doesn't think the roster currently constructed can win a championship, which means that he's probably making a deal soon. We know that the Heat are going to probably make a deal around the deadline too, hopefully looking at a guy like Victor Oladipo or PJ Tucker, or maybe even both. John Collins has also been listed as available, Lonzo Ball as well. So the trading deadline's coming up, and that's going to be a lot of fun to watch as well, including the Utah Jazz, man. Shout out Donovan Mitchell carrying a young, not necessarily a young team, but they've got Gobert and Bogdanovich and Mike Conley, so they're pretty much a veteran team, I should really say. But the young one, Donovan Mitchell, really carrying that small market team. The first seed in the West. I would love to see Donovan Mitchell succeed. Reminds me a lot of a young Dwayne Wade. I would love to see a conference finals between those two. And when you're listening to this, I think the next day will be Nets versus Lakers. So my next episode, I'll probably break down that matchup as the first of hopefully many potentially in the finals between those two. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave us a 5-star review, and follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, I have been your host, Alex Masper. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.